The Trudeau Liberals cannot be trusted with our Canadian Armed Forces. Last year, an Ottawa newspaper carried an article saying a team assigned to a Canadian military intelligence unit monitored and collected information from people's social media accounts in Ontario, claiming such data mining was needed to help troops working in long-term care homes during the COVID-19 pandemic. It's against the law for the military to use its resources against the Canadian public. Why did Trudeau order this? Was it to justify his censorship bill, C-10, which the Senate did not approve and did not become law? Now Trudeau just appointed a slew of new senators, so that won't happen again. In addition, the Canadian military's Joint Operations Command planned a propaganda campaign aimed at heading off civil disobedience by the public during the pandemic. So they mounted a campaign aimed at heading off civil disobedience by the public during a pandemic. The plan called for using similar propaganda tactics as those employed against the Afghan population during the war in Afghanistan. In June, during the last breaths of the 43rd Parliament, the Minister of Truth tabled Bill C-36. Among other things, that law could put you under house arrest and pay a fine of up to $70,000, even if the accuser thinks you may hurt someone's feelings with a communication. All they need to do is find a left-leaning justice of the peace who will put the victim in front of a human rights tribunal. If Trudeau ever got a majority government, what freedoms he hasn't already taken away will be gone. But let's get back to the Trudeau Liberals' use of the military since the time they were first elected. The first thing we know of is the attempt to scuttle a new supply ship. Our Navy had no way to get fuel or other necessities at sea. They destroyed the life of our Vice Chief of Defense Staff, who ended up with a settlement from the government after the Liberals couldn't get a conviction. In 2015, the NATO-led fight against the ISIL in the Middle East was on. Canada was providing air cover with our fighter jets for troops on the ground. Trudeau called back the jets, even though they meant life and death to our allies on the ground. After the international community had shamed him, he sent trainers to teach the people fighting ISIL modern skills. We learned earlier this year the people our troops were tasked to train were war criminals. In 2018, Canadian soldiers in Iraq reported to their superiors that the trainees were bragging about their exploits with videos on their phones. They reported their trainees had violated the laws of armed conflict, raping a girl to death, hanging a man using the barrel of a tank, lining up captured civilians and shooting them. These were individual videos. The men showing their trophies were the people in the videos, and they were committing the atrocities. Their superiors told them not to look at the phones and it'd be sent up to Ottawa for direction. Direction from Ottawa never came. Canadian soldiers in subsequent rotations say they saw the same thing. Was it ever reported to the Prime Minister? We may never know. The Trudeau government acted on allegations from 30 years ago and got rid of the general who was commander at the time, who would have reported it up the chain of command and to the Prime Minister's office. We may never know if Trudeau just sniffed and turned his head away to protect his signature mission in the Middle East. The Defense Committee never did find out if Trudeau knew about the new allegations of sexual misconduct against his Chief of Defense Staff before giving him a $100,000 raise and extending his term. Trudeau refused to allow the key witness who could have told us to testify. The Defense Committee kept trying to learn the truth, but Trudeau kept on having the committee shut down. He called an election, so we may never know if he knew. Maybe he knew and he didn't care because he himself had been in the news for groping a reporter. Or maybe he did know, but wanted to keep something else quiet. The real tragedy is the ongoing incidents of sexual assault in the military. A former Supreme Court justice was tapped to make recommendations, but the problem had already been investigated by another former Supreme Court justice, and the fresh report given to Trudeau just after he became Prime Minister. Trudeau did not implement a single recommendation. When Parliament resumed after Christmas recess this year, news of our top military athletes having competed in Wuhan, China for the World Military Games at the time COVID was circulating there in the fall of 2019 surfaced. The members who had been sick wanted to be tested to see if they had already caught COVID. The military's Surgeon General had refused the request, claiming soldiers and staff were not there while the virus was circulating. Their flu symptoms were so severe, the plane taking them back to Canada had to be cordoned off. The athletes went back to their bases across the country. With the Surgeon General's COVID denial, it's unlikely any report of their illness or exposure to the illness was ever documented. Word the virus had been circulating at the time eventually came out, but it was long after the time we're told the natural antibodies remain in our systems. Instead of being on the safe side and testing the athletes together with the people who had accompanied them, our soldiers were left in the dark. So was everyone who came into contact with them. The Trudeau Liberals cannot be trusted to support the women and men in the Canadian Armed Forces.